would like to give a personal introduction to our speakers. So we have Susan, Mandy, and Alex, and between all three of them, they are people who have genuinely shaped my own understanding of AI, sustainability, and education. So corridor conversation, chats, emails, lectures, generous sharing of resources, ideas. Mandy and Susan, I'm very lucky to know as my colleagues from DTCE. Alex, I met you back in 2012 through Ragged University and have been learning since then from you. So we've introduced Ragged University to you all a bit in the introductory section. I'll leave a link in the chat so that you can explore a bit more. I think what all of you today will notice very quickly is not only how insightful all of our speakers are, but how thoughtfully and clearly they articulate complex ideas. And that is something I think helpful to pick up or learn from them as well. And in today's session, we're shifting the framing of it. So we're moving from, oh, how do we do things? How do we use AI? How do we not use AI? And we're moving to a higher level. That is a level of thinking. How do we almost rethink or approach the issue? Note of housekeeping for students: if we come across any concepts, any ideas, or anything that you want more explanation of, just put it in the chat. We'll take it from the chat and put it in your resource folder, explain it there. And please feel brave to unmute and ask any questions, because we really like your questions. We really want this to be conversational and dialogical. So over to you, Mehdi, to formally introduce our speakers today.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Ivy, for the brief introduction. It's my pleasure to introduce you all with our distinguished speakers. Today, we have a large and esteemed panel here, and we have, first of all, we have Amanda Banks Gatenby. She is a lecturer in digital education at the University of Manchester. Teaching design, development, use, and critical perspectives on educational technology and technology education. She is also a founder of Learn Here Now, a platform project to support learning in or through place using a combination of AI and community in the loop approaches. We also have Alex Dunedin. He is the director of the Ragged University. He contributes to courses in higher education connected with the sustainable and the digital. He focuses on developing resilient tech infrastructure using common technologies to support education and learning. His tech perspectives have been informed by a series of tech experiments and formats which have highlighted fundamental issues with cutting-edge technologies. And finally, we also have with us Susan Brown, who has worked as the director of two master's programs at the Manchester Institute of Education, focusing on digital education and sustainability education. Her interests in the digital and sustainable have helped inform the design of new module focusing on sustainable educational technology development. So without further ado, let me hand over to the speakers. I hope you enjoy the session. Thank you. Over to you, Mandy, Susan, and Alex.
That's it. Right. Shall I get the ball rolling, Mandy? Yeah? Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So thank you very much for inviting us along to this really important set of lectures, presentations, and to all of the dynamics associated with those, which we're really enjoying engaging with. Today, we present 3 different perspectives on AI as linked to transformative learning and sustainability. The first perspective explores how understanding AI as a mirror offers transformative learning opportunities. The second explores transformative learning from the perspective of an ecological worldview. And the third argues that transformative learning comes from embedded learning and has little to do with AI tools. We wanted to present a significantly integrated set of perspectives, though we realized that we're approaching the subject from interrelated, though different ones. So perhaps think of this more as a collage, and letting you know that each of us would be very happy to talk about our particular perspectives in more detail as we go along. So we thought we'd very briefly discuss what we did last year. So last year we discussed AI use in education from a computing within limits perspective, which recognizes that computing tech needs to operate within the ecological, material, and energy boundaries of the planet. We contrasted this perspective with a more is more perspective, which assumes that technology use can be infinitely scaled, which of course it can't. We argued that a computing within limits perspective creates rich opportunities for more creative and discerning tech use and opportunities for rich learning. Alex argued that learning dominated by this perspective that more tech is better can reduce diverse opportunities for learning and lead to unhelpful cognitive dependencies on tech tools rather than the active exploratory engagement with our environment needed to better understand sustainability challenges, but also dynamic systems and models many times more complex than can be artificially simulated, demonstrated by digital tech, i.e. the difference of learning from looking at a thunderstorm or a computer simulation of a thunderstorm. The real world learning simply produces greater cognitive training environments outside of programming. Mandy told a cautionary tale about the world of the computer scientist, about the work of the computer scientist and educator Seymour Papert on Logo Turtle. Papert wanted the Logo tech to transform education, but realized that its success was contingent on the social and political relations that would allow it to do transformational work, which they didn't. Real innovation requires not just new tools, but new ways of thinking, teaching, designing, and governing. And Mandy's going to explore this perspective in greater detail in the upcoming slides and her perspective. So over to you, Mandy.
Thanks, Susan. Sorry, I'm having a few Teams glitches as we talked about when we started. So hopefully this is sharing what we're talking about. But I think I'm just going to skip back because I think we maybe missed this one because it wasn't coming up. So just to say, this is essentially a picture representing us, I think. So the one on the left is me, and we thought we'd lay out what AI means to us before we're using that term. So obviously the picture on the left, which is not me, for a start, it's a man. But this was a picture generated by ChatGPT with my students who were engaging with the social media trend of prompting ChatGPT to generate a prompt to create an image of how I have treated you so far, and please be honest. So that's the prompt. So this is what ChatGPT thinks of me and our relationship in terms of how I've used it so far. It could be worse. So for me, AI is a huge and exciting field of research and development driven, at least in its early days, by people who are fascinated by fundamental processes such as learning, communication, evolution, in the experiences of humans and other species and existences, and they're trying to better understand those processes by modeling them, by expressing them computationally. And that notion of AI is grounded in topics like philosophy of mind, theoretical physics, and it's a fundamentally human topic. And I'm going to refer to that as AI as a mirror, just to keep it distinct. Because for me, ChatGPT, DeepSeek and the like are just incidental outputs from the work of that exciting field. They're tools. And many of the frameworks around AI literacy or AI competency that have emerged in response to those tools being widely used tend to use AI to mean AI tools or predominantly AI tools. So the way those specific tools are designed and developed and put into practice, I see that as grounded in fields like business and socio-political studies. And I worry that we're so consumed with reacting to that latter notion of AI that we're losing the transformative potential that the notion of AI as a mirror could have on and for education systems, and the transformative learning that could lead to. So many frameworks further ingrain that narrow view of AI, but I want to argue that a sustainability approach might be a way to return us to those greater transformative possibilities that AI as a mirror perspective offers. So Susan, I don't know if you wanted to say your position on AI.
Thank you. Thank you, Mandy. So I'm represented by a tree here. It's actually the mother tree. From Professor Suzanne Simard's work. I'm interested in the role education can play in helping us change unsustainable ways of living and learning to ways of being more attuned to sustainability. I am caveat, I'm not an expert on AI or on AI tools. This said, I wonder whether AI has a potential role to play in helping us extend our ecological worldviews. Currently, I don't think the tools we have do that at all. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely fine.
I come from a perspective particularly rooted in the community and the de facto encounter of the application of this field that's emerged. So I'm very interested in seeing how these technologies are finding their way into people's lives and how they are affecting people and how they're apprehending the world around them. So that said, I'm interested in how people have honed their knowledge on, who have honed their knowledge on natural phenomena are in the best place to make practical use of technologies because they know what they're looking at and where or how the tools can be used for mapping the dynamics of the living dynamic universe. And when we look at a digital environment, we're looking at a lossy environment. So how do I describe this? If you take a square foot of digital space and compare it to the real world, a square foot in the real world, we can infinitely zoom in and out in the real world and find more information. So that will give you a sense of what I'm going to be approaching in my presentation today.
Thanks, Alex. So as Susan said, I'm going to talk a little bit about from a historic perspective, and I'm going to talk about an academic called Seymour Papert to address this issue from our abstract, which was how AI technology that's locked into formal curricula is reduced to a testing ground for the passive adoption of AI tools. And I'm going to try and suggest how thinking differently from a Papert lens and starting from a sustainability perspective might offer us a way out, or at least a useful starting point. So a quick bit of background on Seymour. After completing a couple of doctorates in maths and maths education, he became co-director of the MIT Artificial Intelligence Lab with Marvin Minsky. And they famously wrote this book, Perceptron's Introduction to Computational Geometry, in 1969, very much in early AI development research. And this showed the limits of an approach that was being used in neural networks at the time. And that this book is blamed for moving AI research towards symbolic approaches, which is said to have delayed research for years. But he's best known for his work on using computation as a new literacy for his education theories. Because, of course, AI is modeling learning. So that's his work was very much in that. And his was based on the powerful idea that in attempting to model a concept on a computer, we've got to break it down, our understanding of that concept, in order to remake it in this new representational form. And that form represents sort of a creative or process version of the concept. So as an example, if you think about a simple concept like square, that consists, it's very, very complex. It consists of all these representations, the speech sound square, obviously in English here, the written word that represents that, letters S-Q-U-A-R-E in English. We've got the kind of alternative meanings. So you are square means you are boring in a UK context, certainly in the 1980s, or a town square. And then the mathematical representation, a shape with 4 equal sides. But of course, it also includes all of our embodied experiences of what a square is. If we want to make a computational representation of that concept, it's quite different. And for that, we need to think about those ways that we represent that concept already and how we draw one, for example. And then we have to formulate an expression of that in a machine interpretable language. So thinking about this with a tool that's used quite commonly for teaching young children programming, so Scratch, which was actually designed by Papet's PhD student, Mitch Resnick. We might have pseudocode, which is like programming language independent, in how we'd represent a square. And that would be something like this. So it'd be repeat 4 times, pen down, move forward 10, rotate 90 degrees. So that process of trying to articulate and express this concept in this computational way, it's a new way into understanding the concept. And crucially for Papet, it's not the only way, and it's not the most important way or the most useful way, but the transformative power is from making explicit the relation of that way of understanding a concept to other ways of understanding and expressing. So that relates to a quote from Etienne Wenger-Traynor that I love. He's known mostly for his communities of practice social learning theory, but his early work was in artificial intelligence research in modeling teaching. And his first book, AI and Tutoring Systems, he says, you can only express what you know well, and you get to know well what you try to express. And that came from his exploration of Papet's work, which he describes as a dialectical enterprise that was only beginning to be appreciated when the book was written in 1987. And I would suggest that our responses to generative AI tools show that we still haven't fully appreciated this. I think this is a really powerful way of articulating something actually quite simple, and the impact of which is already being evidenced widely in research on the use of AI tools. That it's through trying to express an idea and a concept that we come to understand it. And then if we use a tool that can produce a fully formatted expression of a concept for us with little expressive effort on our part, we're not going to come to know that concept well. We need to have constraints on our expressions to be able to make mistakes in our attempts, with mistakes fueling our learning process. But the need for these constraints is where that AI is a mirror or a field of modeling to understand the transfer of knowledge between agents, expressing out what our learning is, that can put us in a much stronger position to take us in a more profound direction that the narrow focus on AI tools won't do. So Papet developed this whole programming language and a physical device called the robot turtle to support this new way into expression and understanding. And that physical device was fundamental to relate embodied experience to the abstract coding. And the vision here was to transform the way abstract concepts like maths and science across but all disciplines was taught in schools. But instead, there was a heavy focus on the tools, not the human learning. And that was the point of the initiative. And so we ended up with a discrete subject in most curriculums that was called computing or computer science or IT. And much of that was about learning to program for the sake of being able to program. And I suspect we're heading the same way with AI now. We could easily end up with a curriculum subject of AI or AI literacy, which will be about using AI tools. And a lot of frameworks are heading us down this path already. And the real powerful idea of Papet's work is even further than just this idea of expression and representation. He suggests that in exploring how we're breaking down these concepts and then recreating them in this form, we understand them in different ways and we actually create new knowledge about the thing we're exploring. So as an example, through exploring how children used this physical robot and programming to understand geometry, Papet, who obviously had a background in maths, he developed a new proof for the subtended angle theorem. I don't know what that is, but this was a brand new mathematical proof that emerged from not from direct maths practice, but from exploring the ways we learn about it. So this is a really powerful idea that all his work is based on. So why didn't it take hold and have the impact that he was hoping for? Well, Agalianos and Nosson-Whitty in the paper referenced here, they have a great in-depth study in this, but essentially they say that technology needs to be surrounded by social and political relationships that will allow it to do transformational work. The introduction of technology alone cannot possibly bring about radical change. So if we try to use AI as a mirror in current educational systems, that's going to be a real challenge. And I'd suggest that's mostly because most curriculums say very little or nothing about how we learn. We teach study skills and we may be very innovative in the way that we teach different subjects, but the subject we don't seem to teach at all is how we learn. And how many curricula explore this really exciting and fundamental topic as a topic in its own right. But if there's one topic that's worth situating as a topic in its own right, because it's foundational to everything else we do in a curriculum, it's how do we learn? And AI as a mirror would fit right in if that's the curriculum we currently had. But it's probably too big a leap to try and rethink existing curricula in these terms. So, and drawing on some of the AI competency frameworks may not help us move that way as much as it could, because again, there's a focus on AI tool competency. And we need to be thinking about this modeling of learning and not heading for a discrete curriculum topic. So a framework's most useful in terms of the kind of questions it can lead us to ask and explore. And I think there is a framework that exists that can help us move as educators in the direction of starting our learning designs with learning processes themselves. And that's the UNESCO Sustainability Competencies Framework. So if we think about the aspects of learning processes that were represented here, so things like systems thinking, if we think about the kinds of questions that's going to lead us to explore if we apply it to, for example, AI tools, that absolutely would allow us to incorporate this AI as a mirror perspective. And I know that there's plenty of research going on with AI developers using these sorts of approaches like systems thinking, that AI tools are going to get increasingly better at emulating, but we're not teaching them in schools, or at least not well or widely enough, because we're too busy teaching how to pass tests up for debate. So just to give one example, taking that systems thinking idea, this could be applied to a curriculum topic and to the use of AI tools within that topic. But even if we apply it just directly to AI tools, the questions that this competency framework opens up seem to me to offer possibilities of expression with far more transformative potential than the framework that begins with the tools. And this framework can be used to inform aspects of curriculum, content and assessment design. And we're exploring that kind of integration as we develop the DTCE programme. Of course, a framework like computer models is always an abstraction from complexity. And this framework is built on a whole body of research and ways of thinking that we need to understand in order to effectively put that framework into practice. So I'm going to ask Susan now to help us with understanding what are the ways of thinking that underpin these competencies and the possible pedagogies that we might associate with such an approach.
Thank you, Mandy. So I'm thinking about transformative education from a sustainability perspective. And in this focus, and following on from Mandy's discussion on the use of AI from the perspective of how we learn, I consider understandings of transformative learning from the perspective of an ecological worldview. This photo may be one that you recognize. I've moved on to the next one, Mandy. Transformative learning for sustainability is interested in the shifts in worldview that can change the systems we live in and the stories we live by. It argues for nothing less than a transformation of humanity's role on planet Earth. O'Sullivan, and you can see his quote on screen, argues that transformative learning involves experiencing deep structural shifts in basic premises of thoughts, feelings, and actions. It's a shift of consciousness that dramatically and permanently alters our way of being in the world. The shift includes our understanding of ourselves, our self-location, and our relationships with other humans and with the natural world. You probably all know that humans have recently circled the moon on the Artemis 2 moon mission. The Artemis astronauts say that through the mission, they experience what's called the overview effect, where the sight of the Earth in the darkness of space shifted their views of it and inspired a deep, even spiritual connection with it and with everything on it. Such shifts in worldview can happen at an individual and collective level, and often in response to experiences that challenge our perceptions. The Apollo space mission photograph of Earthrise from 1968 may have led to a collective and fundamental shift in how we looked at our planet, one that possibly spawned many environmental movements. Shifts in the collective and cultural ways we see our Earth are essential to making the socio-ecological challenges that we must if we're to survive and thrive. Experiences can change our worldviews, but our worldviews and the values and dispositions linked to them can calcify to the point where they determine what we see and what we don't. They can mean that we see a society run on fossil fuels as the norm, that we view our lives through tiny screens and not in connection to the world immediately around us. It can mean that we fail to notice the absences of other species around us, their sounds, their colors, or recognize other intelligences. The technologies we engage with, and particularly AI can reflect back at us our myopias. As the author James Bridle puts it in Ways of Being, and I can really recommend that book, once a way of seeing has been molded into a tool, it's very hard to think otherwise. He goes on to say that we use our machines often without really understanding what they're doing and uncritically accept the worlds they present to us. They come to define our reality and to erase the awareness that other realities exist. So eco-literacy as an essential aspect of transformative sustainability education can help us address those myopias. It can move us towards a worldview which recognizes the innate intelligence in living systems and species, and those are systems on which we're entirely dependent. Fritjof Capra, some of you may know him, is a physicist and writer who's known, among other things, for his thinking on eco-literacy. Capra argues that the survival of humankind depends on eco-literacy. That is to say, in his definition, on our skills to apprehend knowledge from nature, to understand the basic principles of ecology, and to live accordingly. He says that we can learn from societies, human and nature systems that have sustained themselves for centuries. He defines a sustainable community as one that's designed so that its way of life, businesses, economy, physical structures, and technologies respect, honor, and cooperate with nature's inherent ability to sustain life. Over the last century or so, we've been discovering the wonderful and intelligent ways life sustains itself. For example, Professor Suzanne Simard, whose work I read a lot and really appreciate, her work on the way, she works on the way trees communicate with each other through mycorrhizal fungal networks. And that work has provided a wonderful perspective on communities of trees and how they share resources to survive. Trees, she argues, talk to each other and look out for each other. Such understandings may have been held in indigenous communities for millennia, and their understandings we can and should learn from. We need a learning society which challenges ingrained assumptions we've held about the world. For example, that we're the only really intelligent species on Earth, that we can survive in a world stripped of natural diversity, and that a more is more view of technology is sustainable. Eco-literacy understands the deep, vital relations between all living things, relations that can help us change our unsustainable worldviews and systems. It's for this reason I think eco-literacy is essential to any learning context and to the use of and design of computing. In his book, Ways of Being, James Bridle argues that the world isn't like a computer. Rather, a computer is like the world. Corporate artificial intelligence and other artificial stupidity, he says, attempts to dominate the world by making models of it. But to make a model is to abstract and represent. It's an act of distancing from the world when we're soaked in and inseparable from it. His point is that computers shouldn't be drawing our learning into automated systems away from the world, but rather they can help us understand the great complexities of what's already in the world, the complex, surprising, evolving, more than human world that surrounds us. These computers are nothing like the moribund AI tools we engage with in our daily lives. And just as an aside, I appreciated the word dormant in the Padlet area. I can't remember which group it was, but I thought that was an interesting term to use. They're lively machines that help us understand the wonders of the world of which we are a part. We may be able to create the computers which help us in understanding ourselves, not as humans in isolation, but as humans in relation to the biosphere and ecosphere. In fact, the design of the architecture of these machines may be inspired by ecological systems that have sustained themselves for millennia. So, I argue here then that eco-literacy is essential to the lively exploration of the living and computational world we live in. It helps us re-envision ourselves as humans in the network of living systems on which we depend. An ecological worldview can be a guiding force behind the continuing evolution of sustainability and AI competencies. And that's why I nest these competencies into this circle in yellow of ecological life and an ecological worldview. I see transformative learning and the constellation of pedagogical approaches associated with it as a means of invigorating learning, which is ecological and which may point AI tools in more interesting directions. Embodied, experiential learning is a part of this. And at this point, I think we neatly segue into Alex's section, perspective. And in passing the baton, I asked Alex the following question. Do you think AI tools have a role to play at all in transformative learning from a sustainability perspective? Thank you, Alex. Over to you.
Thank you, Susan. I think I will pick up on your question, Susan, and think about the context of the use of specific tools and ask, by using them, what do they transform us into? I come from a perspective of education and learning beyond the institution, looking at education as human development. That is, learning in our lives is a behavior which embodies the exercise we have experienced in ourselves as capabilities, and so that when we come to encounter specific things, we recognize them. And when we attempt to do specific tasks, we can achieve them. So, as living organisms, I see us developing, also known as evolving, through experiential learning, doing activity which involves us experiencing through forms of exercise and exertion, new phenomena and configurations of stimuli. So really being present. Embodied learning, that knowledge, which I see as knowingness, coming to know something, is embodied in the phenomena we directly encounter and interact with, and how this promotes changes in our own nervous system through processes called neuroplasticity and neural pruning. So our internal world, our physiology, is directly shaped by our encounters of our own activities and our environment. And learning in place, that different knowledge or knowingness is situated in different places. So where you place your mind, senses and feelings exposes us to unique configurations of the universe we learn from. Everywhere is going to provide an absolutely different encounter. So my particular interests see AI as tools, as another technology in the process of being designed by humans, being proposed as powerful but not being reliable. That is something that should not be relied upon. At this point, I should be clear about what I mean when I refer to AI. For this, I think Arvind Narayanan and Sayash Kapoor's book, AI Snake Oil, What Artificial Intelligence Can Do, What It Can't, and How to Tell the Difference, helps us understand the constellation of different technologies which get bundled together under the term of artificial intelligence. I recommend their books and podcasts. I am most concerned about the use of large language models and technologies attempting to move towards what get called general AI. The term itself, artificial intelligence, is a marketing term, like smartphones, designed to tune into our vanities and excite us into buying into a product which has many hidden costs. Richard Stallman, famed for championing the free software movement, calls large language models pretend intelligence. And I think it's more helpful as a description. So my interests in seeing the honest contrast between the technologies which are marketed at us, by questionable multinationals, and understanding what affordances there are in using more free and universal technologies to scaffold learning and develop what I'm calling insourced intelligence. That is, building capability into our own heads and hearts and hands, rather than getting a machine to do things for us. This comes from the low-tech, no-tech perspectives, which recognizes ideas of computing within limits. The realities of effective education I am interested in are the ones which are most universally available to all people in terms of costs, and the ones which are rational in terms of the physical resources of the world and its living systems. I'm not interested in investing in technologies which put people in debt or which bankrupt the living world. For these reasons, ecological literacy is needed in order to assess the appropriate use of technologies. Is it appropriate to use large language models to produce a recipe for tomato soup when the cost drives climate breakdown, produces respiratory illness and cancers via pollution which data centers put out? As an analogy, Professor Kevin Anderson puts it in simple terms with another technology which is problematic. It doesn't make sense to drive a car, which is 2 tons of metal, 1 kilometer to fetch 5 kilograms of groceries. Next slide, please. So in these terms, the opportunity costs have to be much more central in our consideration of how we use technologies in educational context. We're seeing lots of emerging cognitive damages from the use of AI tools, which produce seeming convenience and shortcutting in the lives of people at the cost of losing the exercise which develops our own nervous systems. The tools which are proliferating are causing a range of cognitive issues which stem from our outsourcing intellectual work in order to produce outputs. This is encouraged by tech companies, a behavior I see as people gaming their own lives and defrauding themselves of experience, exercise, and enrichment, ultimately producing dependencies on the technology. Mandy Piralowski at Leeds Beckett University explores this evolving outcome as a sort of cyborg anxiety of connection, where through the production of a dependence on a large language model mediated through the smartphone technology, the machine has become incorporated as an extension of being. This outsourcing, particularly to large language models, without the kind of critical and creative reality investigating and checking, which Mandy touched on, brings to mind the dark aspects of the mirror, reflected in 2 stories of Snow White and Narcissus, each of which speak of folk wisdoms and warnings. In Disney's Snow White, based on a 19th century folk tale, the provocation of the mirror of the wicked queen calling for knowledge about the world for her own vanity states, "Slave in the magic mirror, come from the farthest space, through wind and darkness, I summon thee. Speak, let me see thy face." It responds to her prompt. "What wouldst thou know, my queen?" And being able to call on anything, she says, "Magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest? one of all. Well, this has a likeness to the story of Narcissus in the Greek Ovid's Metamorphosis. This character fell in love with his own reflection in a pool of water beside him, and in doing so rejected all advances from those who loved him. It is from this story we get the words narcissist and narcissistic, which referred to self-centered personality traits characterized as an excessive preoccupation with oneself and one's own needs. I suggest that these large language artificial or pretend intelligences, as Stallman rephrases them, are technologies which promote kinds of cognitive narcissism, which are error-prone and capabilities corrosive. Next slide, please. Researchers in dehumanization psychology, Waits, Schroeder, and Epley, describe the lesser minds problem as three key processes of our psychology, and they lay the foundation for seeing others as less human or capable, or less capable as our own selves. These three elements they look at are that our own mind appears brighter to us than other people's minds, so we tend to privilege our own thoughts over others. We witness more readily our own causality than other people's causalities, because we're seeing through our own eyes all the time. We are more aware of the work gone into our own decisions than into other people's decisions. So there is that tendency to see more substance in the decisions we've already codified into our rubrics of decision making. So it is partly these psychological foundations which I see large language models tapping into, ultimately eclipsing interactions with the world around and with deep dialogical interactions and relationships with people and phenomena. By diminishing our direct connection with the world required in reality checking, we become stranded from our true intelligence. These tools simulate causality and so seem brighter in our minds through intimate interactive involvement. These tools excite because they mirror back to us ready outputs, which often we can use to get rewards like recognition, status, and money. These tools promote solipsistic possibilities and require careful reality checking and guarding against harms. When compared to the amount of information found in a square foot of the real world, it can only offer compressed ciphers. Looking at a simulation of a forest is radically different from standing in a real forest, where all the forces and complexities of the universe are held in dynamic tension with each other and may be explored through interaction. The digital realm is a map and not the territory. So I'll stop there, and I hope that was interesting.
I think you're muted, Susan.
Apologies, I was so absorbed. I've forgotten to carry on. We've had three perspectives which are interrelated but they're slightly different. And as we've said before, we're very happy to have ongoing conversations with you about these perspectives. But we have managed to distill between us some key summarizing statements, and I'm going to talk through those now. We advocate for transformative education, which can help us develop the ecological worldviews essential to addressing socio-ecological challenges. We don't think a reliance on AI monopolized by corporate multinationals can help us change those worldviews or respond to the socio-ecological challenges we're facing. Rather, we think it'll get in the way. Dependencies on AI use restrain the many ways in which we can and need to learn in a challenged world. Transformative learning is lively, diverse, experiential, embodied, creative, playful, and sometimes disoriented. Through transformative learning practices, we can continue to evolve the sustainability and AI competencies we need, perhaps in ways we've rehearsed today. Transformative learning may help us re-envisage and design lively machines inspired by ecological systems that have survived for millennia and that can help us do the same. And just to finish, I wonder, Mandy and Alex, if there's anything further you want to add to those unifying perspectives. I think there are many other things that we could have said. There are many other things that we could have distilled, but have we managed to encapsulate most of those things? Yes,
I think so. Yeah.
I think so.
A
Yeah.
nodding of heads. Yeah. All right. So thank you very much. There's a lot there. I hope you're not feeling overwhelmed, but we're looking forward to conversations with you.
So thank you very much, all three of you. Like that was, like Susan, you said, I was so kind of immersed in what you were saying. I'm taking some time to gather my thoughts. If there's one thing that was a thread and that was very powerful that ran through all three of you is standing in a forest is not the same as seeing a simulation of a forest. And I think that kind of encapsulates everything that we want to say about education and AI. Not only learning, but ways of being in the world and how we should be. And there's so much to learn from the world outside of us, from other species, from the world about how we connect, how we be, how we can survive together. But I think that was deeply inspirational talk for me. I won't take too much time because I can go on for hours. But I'll firstly hand over to John for your comments, then over to Gian. So I'm kind of lining up everyone, and then we'll go on to the question and answer session. So John, over to you.
Okay, thank you. I trust I'm audible. Yep, bound to be. God, there was an awful lot of that, and I think I'm bearing in mind that everyone's from different languages and different cultural backgrounds. I'm probably here to ask the dumb questions and make the dumb observations as they, based on like where I'm coming from, as what I heard whizzed past me. And sorry, these are in no particular order and probably quite disjointed. And I may be asking the obvious. Several things occur to me. I mean, I continually find myself wondering if AI is, as it were, quantitative. Is it just more and more, faster and faster of what we already experience in digital terms, or is there some qualitative change going on? Which kind of leads to the question about transformation, because I wonder if stuck between the lack of responsiveness of education systems on the one hand, and the diversity of different cultures, you know, how much room there is, you know, some cultures are quite conservative, some are not, how much room there is between those two things for any transformation. And I suppose one example of that actually is I took one of your points about AI literacy, or indeed eco-literacy, whether that's likely to go the same way as IT literacy and kind of get sanitized, get the criticality of it sanitized out by education systems, and it ending up being something about compliant consumers rather than kind of critical activists. And I wonder about, in hearing about different cultures and hearing the word embodied, whether what we're fighting against is the kind of globalizing tendency of education, the globalizing impact on education systems to unembody what's going on. I mean, I constantly think, if my, I don't know, violinist or dentist or carpenter was trained purely in front of a computer screen, I wouldn't feel very trusting of what they were going to do for me. And yet other cultures have a much more inclusive notion of what learning might kind of embrace the spiritual and the natural world without even thinking there was a difference. And that's actually what we as, I don't know, critical westernized educators need to be thinking about pushing back on. Yes, actually, playing the violin and living in the forest are important aspects of the totality that we live in. Sorry, I hope I'm not ranting. I'm autistic, I rant. One of my other concerns, going back to the remarks about AI, was wondering if we risk getting sucked into talking about AI when in fact we're just talking about ChatGPT, and whether we're ready for, you know, wait for it, the next incarnation, which is presumably generative or maybe something beyond that. And actually we're, I don't know, shutting a stable door that the horse bolted from 3 years ago. That concerns me. And I also worry, I mean, in relation to the kind of transformative education, whether there is a risk that an education for an education for sustainability, as it were, gets dropped into the system as yet another subject. You know, I don't know, unplug calculus from a module and we plug in education for sustainability. And as I say, given the perhaps conservatism of education system, whether that and the kind of sanitizing effect, whether that is a risk. Is that enough to be getting on with? As I say, I hope I'm asking all the dumb questions that everyone else would have loved to have asked, just that they're not as loquacious as me. Sorry, so please, you know.
Thank you, John.
Anyone?
Shall I just say something in relation to education for sustainability and the sanitizing, the sort of global sanitizing of education that you're talking about, John? I mean, those are notions that resonate with me because I think if you're really doing transformational learning, and we talked about the things that can support, and transformational learning almost requires a change in systems. Like systems as they are now, they can't work. So really transformative learning, really transformative pedagogies transform at the systems level. And when that's not happening, they can be sucked into, as you say, just yet another set of terms that you have to respond to in an educational context. In terms of sustainability education, yes, anybody who's thinking in this field is concerned by the siloing of sustainability education in what's happening in any learning context. And this is something, again, that I think we need to be very careful of. So I teach on a degree which is about sustainability education, but really the idea was that for that to be an anchor point for sustainability to flow across curriculums in the way that people want it to flow across curriculums, because there's something very diverse in the notion of sustainability, and it is at heart extraordinarily interdisciplinary. So so there is a trajectory that we're on, which is not useful either to transformative education or to sustainability education, and that's something we have to be extremely vigilant of, and continually work to open the spaces for us, for exactly, for example, in what we're doing here, to ensure that learning breathes new energy in different ways all the time. Yeah.
Sorry, anyone else? I find myself constantly thinking, am I part of the problem? Am I part of the solution? And actually, I also come away from everything thinking, okay, so what should I be doing about this? But actually, maybe that would be a question that everyone else here could be or should be asking themselves. And I suppose we work in education, so maybe that's the only platform we've got, but there are other. Actually, why do I keep saying education when what I mean is learning? I'm sorry, mea culpa. Sorry, Animanda, Alex.
Yeah, just kind of building on what Susan said, I think it has been really interesting for us to see how AI is raising sustainability, and it's particularly digital sustainability in people's minds. So people didn't really question the use of the digital in terms of sustainability as much until we've now got these models, and it's certainly in our cohorts, they're talking about this a lot more. We're working with some of our teacher trainees who are obviously in a whole network of schools across the Northwest, and what we're hearing from them is that a lot of young people are saying, I'm not going to use this because I know it's got a huge environmental impact, in ways that they were never really questioning other technology, which does still have an impact, not as on the same scale, but it does. So I think it's really nice to see, yes, there's all these issues with AI, but it's also providing an opportunity, and it's just how can we shift things to do exactly what you're saying there, Susan, to make sure that we evolve into the right niches in the system rather than entrenching the practices that we're already concerned about.
I get slightly nervous when I hear about people, as it were, abstaining or opting out of AI, because I start thinking about means and ends, or people, as it were, disempowering themselves. But I guess that's thin end of the wedge, slippery slope kind of argument. But I mean, I guess if we talk about AI as some kind of monolithic, undifferentiated blob, then that's probably a bit uncritical, and it consists of, various systems, various people, various organizations, and we have to pick our way through it. And actually, sorry, in listening to Alex and the other two of you, I was trying to think about how does the slogan thinking globally, acting locally or something, pan out in all of this. And also worrying about, I don't know, was it recent work from Harvard that talked about the cognitive style of AI, that when you're engaging with a chatbot, you're not engaging with something that's impersonating an abstract, generic, universal human being. You're engaging with something impersonating probably someone from Silicon Valley, an able-bodied white man. And I guess that there is the risk of that being part of the globalizing effect of technology. And what is the local pushback in that situation? And I don't know, because I'm local here and everyone else is local somewhere else.
Picking up on what you said, about ChatGPT and the horse has bolted. I think, part of what we're learning to do is how to protect ourselves, gate and hack technology So we use technology and it doesn't use us. It is out there, but you know, one of the things that I looked at, and I've been challenging myself to find usefulness in it. You know, what's its practical affordances? And one of the exercises I've developed is to write a piece of writing that I am happy with. You know, my thoughts are on paper, they're articulate, they're where I've wanted it to get to. And then I've given it to large language models and I've said, correct the spelling, the punctuation, and the grammar. And read what it gives back to me and go ask myself, is that what I wanted to write? And I'll let people decide, you know, take that exercise themselves. So education for me is a behavior. A behavior that's involved in making up your mind and changing your mind, and I that helps me. And I work beyond the institution in informal spaces, particularly, and in spaces which often get called the hidden curriculum. I'm reminded of the beautiful quote by John Dewey: education is not preparation for life, it is life itself. So these things I carry with me when I'm encountering any technology. I think Jared Lanier is a very interesting philosopher of technology, and he wrote the book Why to Delete Your Social Media Accounts. And he described how in the 1920s everybody was getting up and having a cocktail, driving to work, but everybody was, so nobody could really, you know, the society couldn't see itself from the outside. So he was suggesting not that everybody gives up social media, but that people have the capability of knowing life without it, so they can see what it's doing in their lives. And that's kind of what I've been doing with technologies, understanding by contrast.
Yeah. Sorry, one of my sorry.
Go on.
Oh, I was just going to say that a further consequence of resisting seeing AI or indeed technology as a kind of undifferentiated blob is the assumption we've all got access to all of it. And I hear, I don't know, Jonathan Donner in my head talking about the fourth world, not the third world, you know, which is fairly connected, albeit much less so than you or I might be. But actually, that world which is unconnected and is getting left behind, you know, where the hard to reach stay harder and harder to reach, and they find us harder and harder to reach. You know, so it's all it's kind of inserting as much, I don't know, granularity or specificity or concreteness into any of the ways in which this is talked about. I've no idea if. Oh, sorry, I've no idea. I'm thinking it's not. I'm not the traffic cop, but I'm not quite sure.
No, that's okay. No, that's completely okay. Thank you so much, John. Over to Gian. So commentary from UNESCO.
Thank you. I think you can all hear me. Yes, wonderful. Thank you so much, Amanda, Susan, and Alex for the rich presentation and very provocative ideas and thoughts. I think I'm glad to hear that this presentation really emphasized the power of experiential learning. Learning, you know, is situated in a place and, you know, through relationships and in collaboration with people. And that's something that we constantly advocate at UNESCO. It's a very core part of our advice to member states. Bearing in mind, you know, the well-being of learners and obviously the sustainability element. I think, you know, I think Amanda, you made the most extensive references to competency frameworks, and even, you know, UNESCO's own AI competency frameworks just have a small little section on understanding the sustainability element to the use of AI. And I think it's nice that it's there, but it doesn't really speak to how AI can be used to promote transformative learning, which could be a slight miss on our side as well. And so I just wanted to share that it's nice to combine this idea of transformative learning with, you know, how AI could assist with it. What I appreciated from all three of you was that, you know, you didn't really go to an extreme of saying, oh, avoid using it, right? It's like, how can we challenge the current narrative and discourse, and even, you know, the ways we are being encouraged to use AI, particularly the LLMs, and instead try to take an alternative approach where it may encourage us, for example, to develop more ecological literacy, to take note more of the context, and maybe potentially not see sustainability as opposed to the use of AI, like as a, you know, opposing, right? But perhaps how it can facilitate a better understanding of that in education. I think as Professor Traxler John has mentioned, you know, education is very how would I say, it's slow moving. It doesn't adapt very well to these changes. When you talk about learning, I think it's really there's a lot of opportunity to bring these ideas into informal learning spaces that Alex mentioned. And I think you kind of put that in your caveat in the abstract, that you're mainly talking about informal learning spaces. But I do want to mention, and this is a question I have, is that perhaps in your institution, so at the institutional level, how do you think institutions can promote this kind of thinking? So promoting transformative learning and understanding of, you know, the limits of or the limits that should be imposed due to sustainability on the use of AI for learning. You know, how can an institution respond to that? Because like at UNESCO, we often take a macro view, a big, you know, bird's eye view of how everything is happening in a country, such as India, which is huge. But actually, when we go to schools and we talk to teachers, there are amazing institutions that are, for example, you know, they're teaching in the language of a particular tribal community, and then using translanguaging approaches, right, to promote trilingualism, which is very common in the Indian context. So they may teach like a majority language or like Hindi, but then they start first with their tribal language, and then even have some elements of an English curriculum. So just in terms of multilingualism, this is not technology specific, but they are sort of taking the broad curriculum guidance of a national education policy and zooming it down right into like within the 2-kilometer, 5-kilometer radius of where the school's situated. So in that same idea, I think, you know, how perhaps one solution at an institutional level of how, you know, how your ideas can manifest in practice. And I'm asking that because for the past 3 or 4 seminars in all the Padlets, I did notice that the students have been asking, you know, in practice, what can we do? You know, how can we change, or how can we adapt and enact some of the great ideas that have been discussed in the webinars. So maybe I'm just putting this big question back to all three of you, and then once we have completed that round of responses, maybe we can then open the floor to the students. Yes. who wants to take the the challenge here?
Thank you. Those are all really interesting observations, and you're asking big questions, which to approach it, I would say, in relation to how do institutions take this forward? How do they begin to think about sustainability, the very discerning use of AI and what they're doing? And the first thing that would have to say is they don't do what they're doing now. With the greatest respect, you don't want a university to be co-opted by big multinationals with entirely different aspirations to the ones that a university has. So what does that mean? Well, a long time ago, I wrote an article looking at the dynamics in a university between what's happening top down and what's happening bottom up. And I interviewed a lot of people at the university. It was very, very interesting. And there was one person that said to me, you have to let 1,000 flowers bloom. You have to let the energies and the inspirations of people working in the university to flower. And that was contrasted with another perspective, which I understood, which said, yes, but in order for us to engage with that digital, we have to bring people on board. We have to have a center. And I looked at those polar opposites and thought, and this may sound really trite, but yes, you do need to have both. But both, if you have both, you can't impose from the top. There needs to be a happy medium, and an imposition from the top will take you in wildly different directions to the directions that we're talking about today. So I think it's a sort of institutional level work that's happening, but really I think having faith in the people that work there and the ideas that they have, the languages that they speak, and the cultural backgrounds that they come from. So it's that 1,000 flowers blooming, which I would say is important.
Wonderful.
Should I
Thank you,
go?
Susan. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, as Susan says, such a big question. I think my background is more in schools, and I think it's probably sort of different answer depending on whether we're talking about higher education, primary education, secondary. But thinking perhaps offering us a sort of a different perspective rather than the institution as a whole, but within the institution as an educator, what can we do? I'm going to use the unit that myself and Susan and Alex all work on together. I think one thing that we've managed to do within the confines of the institution that seems to work, where we have been allowed to flower with our ideas more, is to put perspectives in tension, and I think that's really helped in terms of exploring ways for this transformative learning. We're very genuinely team teaching and bringing different perspectives in dialogue with the students, perspectives that don't necessarily always agree. We also have somebody that works with us in that unit who was for 20 years a global sustainability director at Microsoft. So a very, very different perspective, and making those perspectives very visible and showing that it's okay to be in tension and to work these through together. I think that's certainly moved us in a really positive direction with the students in that sense.
Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
So, well, what came to mind was some of the work of Iris Marion Young, who spoke about corporate structures and the ability of people to do the work that they think that they needed to do. And often people have control over other people's actions, but little control over their own. So organizational structures, having that, instilling that trust and agency in the people who are working within them, and moving away from some, more Taylorism inspired systems, I think goes a long way. In terms of activities, I think challenging people to innovate using available infrastructure and common technology, that rather than reaching for, bespoke tech, infrastructure and cutting edge technology, it's a lot more fun. It's a lot more adaptable. People get a real kick out of it. It's fantastic refurbishing a computer. It's great fun taking something off the scrap heap and getting it to function better than a computer that that's got Windows 11 and comes straight out of PC world. So, I think what I call the root and leaf model of personal practice might be worthwhile. So I think about, I've been trying to think about healthy technology engagement and what constitutes it. And I was thinking about plants. Now, the root ball determines the size of the plant above ground. It's often, much of its health. And so I started it in my own practice going, okay, when I use a computer or a technology, I'm going to mirror that out in the real world. So if I'm going to imagine if I'm going to use a large language model, I'm going to, justify that by doing that work with pen and paper, or even walk a kilometer just to get a sense of the embodied energy that's being used, or do some practical activity that is not set in cyberspace. If this applies to connecting over the internet too. In social media terms, I suspect that the people who are healthiest are people who have relationships outside of social media too. So those are some ideas, but certainly have fun with it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think different perspectives. So bringing different perspectives into the discussion definitely helps. I think also opening up who controls the decisions made in the institutions. This is something that is difficult, but I think I've heard of some examples where schools set up boards that involve students as a group of representatives, a number of parents, community leaders, and school management and teachers, all kind of trying to collaboratively come to a decision on how to spend certain resources. And this could perhaps also influence policies on AI or digital use. I think Ivy may be on her way to another event, but I'm supposed to take care of the Q&A section of things. So perhaps there have been a number of questions being asked that have been asked in the chat, but I would like to give the students an opportunity, or basically any participant, to raise your hand, unmute, and ask the panel a question or two. Please go ahead, raise your hand, and we can give you the floor. Could I do perhaps I have to do the teacher thing or the moderator thing of asking someone directly, like Shakil, you've been quite active in the chat and asking great questions. Could you ask, direct a question to the participant, to the speakers?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I
Thank you.
don't know where to start because at any given point it's a different question, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, I mean, I think just the question about like whatever fears and concerns that we're seeing right now with AI, like were some of those fears already there even before AI, right? And whether some of our existing institutions or systems were already contributing to that. So even if we dismantle AI, will the trend still continue because of those institutional systems in place? Because I kind of feel that AI is not in a bubble, right? It's also kind of connected to a number of different things. So just wondering what your reflections are on that. So even if, yeah, because I don't think the struggle is just against that. So what is the struggle really against? Yeah.
Global capitalism.
Yeah. Your questions just reminded me of a quote from a book that I love, which is "Living with Robots" by DeMichel and Damiano, and I've just found it so I can get it right. They say recourse to a non-human actant is facilitated by the relative desocialization of the task. So basically, if a task is already dehumanized, AI can fall into it really easily. So yeah, absolutely. I think all the different ways in which education has been dehumanized is where you're seeing AI come in. So I'm always encouraging my students, if you're going to use it, what is it you're substituting for? And are you genuinely happy with the substitution of yourself in that task? So yeah, absolutely. I think the AI is falling into the opportunities that were already there for it. Yeah.
Susan, did you want to say something?
It's just in response to what I think you're asking, Shaka, which is the root causes, and and we've been thinking about AI for a very, very long time, in very different ways, right back to Turing and his Oracle machine. So there's always been some really interesting stuff going on in AI terms. So I don't think AI is a root cause of some of the issues that we're facing now. I think those causes are systemic. I think we all know this, but we just have to remind ourselves that these causes are systemic. They're probably coming from a small group of people who are essentially dominating the thinking in the world. And in order to change those views, to change that, I do think we need to address our own world views. Now, how you do that is very interesting. But the one thing that we do know is that people's worldviews change, and they can change very radically, very quickly. So we don't reach a certain age and then nothing changes. We develop blind spots, and those blind spots are very, very interesting, but we can change. So I hold on to that as a momentum for thinking in innovative ways about the ways in which we can do that. And I don't exclude AI in the fullest sense of the word that Mandy's been talking about, in that venture. I think it can play a part. It shouldn't play a dominating part. It shouldn't, but it can play a role. But not the AI, not with the AI governance that we have now, the multinational governance, the sort of attracted to all of the norms and away from all of the lovely diverse things that we've been talking about in relation to what's happening in different parts of the world.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Susan. Could I bring in Nori, actually, my colleague who is based in Dhaka in Bangladesh. Nori, perhaps your discussions with education stakeholders in Bangladesh and the region, what is the key question about AI and sustainability that has come up?
Okay.
And maybe the panelists can take a stab at answering that from their talk.
Okay. Let me try. Hi everybody. This is Neri. I'm also with UNESCO. Maybe before I respond to Jian's question, I think every session in this seminar series has been a wonderful opportunity for me and also for UNESCO to critically reflect upon our own practices. I think, for example, if we look at the primary education subsector for the last 4 or 5 years, it's been predominantly about foundational learning, which is numeracy literacy. I'm not questioning the importance of numeracy literacy, but the way we've been discussing and turning it into project is really through this reductionist approach. We only look at those aspects of numeracy literacy learning that's measurable, quantifiable, and these rich aspects around, how do we learn? All these things tend to get lost during that process. So I'm not blaming anybody. It's also a critical reflection on my own sort of practice as a development expert. I think as UNESCO, as the education sector, we need robust sort of set of theories of learning. I think that's really missing. And going back to Jian's question, maybe my response would be, it's missing, at least where we are in Bangladesh, in our discussion on AI. We haven't reached the stage where we have the conditions to discuss all these rich theories around learning and the sustainability, and how do we go about making sure that's integrated into AI. At this point, at this very nascent stage of our conversation, it's still about very simplistic ways of looking at AI and how can we turn it into, again, project, what's trending among the donors, what's more attractive for them to be able to provide us with funding. So I think it's a homework at this point, but I think I really learned a lot of takeaways for me, and so I can have follow-up discussion with my government counterparts. So thank you so much. It's been extremely useful. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks, Nori. Actually, I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of, policymakers are looking at AI as a skills requirement, right? A very utilitarian, like, let's use this. If we don't use this, we get left behind. And this fear of missing out kind of thought process is driving a huge change in allocation of resources and, development of projects. So as he said, I think trying to elaborate on an alternative approach and the importance of the alternative approach to an overall well-being of students and teachers and an entire system is actually quite important, and certainly something we should take up. Yeah. World Economic Forum, and the fourth Industrial Revolution. Yes, wonderful buzzwords. I think recognizing that it's 5 minutes past 5 in India. I think we're about 5 minutes past our time. I want to thank all the panelists for all the speakers for your reflections, and of course all the participants who chimed in on the chat, as well as my colleagues Nori, and Ivy and Mehdi, of course. Thank you so much for engaging today. It was really rich. There will be a follow-up to all the students and teachers and focal points. There will be a follow-up email from Mehdi with all the resources. Take a look and look forward to your inputs on the post-seminar Padlet. Once again, thank you so much, Susan, Amanda, Alex, and of course, John. Have a great day, morning, afternoon, and evening, and see you again. Bye bye.
Thank you very much.
so much.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.